And I think the biggest danger here is not what is being framed as an escalation with this new measure, but it's that the Philippines, I think, is increasingly relying on the U.S. or the U.S. is intervening in this dispute. And this makes me think of an African proverb that seems very apt in describing this dynamic. And it goes something like this. Leaning on a crumbling wall can only bring you down with it. And I'll elaborate just very briefly on what I mean here. I think there's increasing questions about whether the U.S. is, in fact, a legitimate Pacific power. And I think this is certainly going to be more of an issue in the coming months and years. And I think there's also increasing doubts raised about the efficacy of the United States Navy, whether it's the fallout from the Fat Leonard scandal, where a large number of senior Navy officers were implicated in a bribery scandal, including not just money, but sex. We look at the stress that many of the ships in the Seventh Fleet have been under, resulting in accidents like the McCain, the submarine, the Connecticut. And I think there's real doubt growing around the world whether that if the Philippines is looking again to lean on this crumbling wall, that this wall may take it down with it.
A lot of people are saying, a lot of pundits are saying, we should go the diplomatic route. But is there still kind of like a chance for this to happen? Have we crossed the point of no return? Have we really crossed the Rubicon?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And I completely agree with you that this is a highly emotional issue, as most territorial disputes between countries are, that this can't help but evoke very powerful emotions and often negative emotions against the other claimants in a dispute. So I think we all need to be as careful as we can here, or the principals involved in resolving this need to be as careful as they can. But I think, China's been very clear about this type of dispute, because we know this area, first of all, this is not just a dispute between China and the Philippines, but many, many other countries have disputes, some involving China, some not. And I think that the best way is negotiation among the parties with a direct stake. And I think that also has been China's position all along, that outside parties should not intervene and should not try to escalate or provoke the situation. And again, from China's view, this is what is happening. I mean, and it's certainly my personal hope that this can be resolved in a way that largely addresses the needs of the parties directly involved in this dispute.
Right. So Beijing is clearly against internationalizing the issue, if that's even a verb. But I mean, the dialogue, the track of dialoguing just directly with the parties involved, that hasn't worked very well, has it either? I mean, I'm talking specifically about the bilateral consultation mechanism, which was established 7 years ago now, May 2017. There have been 8 meetings, as far as I know. The last one in January of this year. Both sides, by that I mean Philippines and China, failed to make headway once again. And also the other track, which is China working with the ASEAN claimants, not just the claimants, but all of ASEAN on a declaration of conduct on the South China Sea, that hasn't moved forward either. So, can it be argued that that track isn't working either?
You're absolutely right. I think what we can say, it hasn't been making a lot of progress yet. And I think another feature of these kinds of disputes is that they're contentious and they take a very, very long time, years, sometimes perhaps decades, to resolve. So I think maybe a part of this is also setting expectations. And I think certainly everyone involved would like to see it resolved sooner versus later. But again, these are the types of issues that I think are just not that amenable to a quick solution.
You also have one interesting theory, Andy, from previous interviews. I watched some of your previous interviews, and you've said before that you don't believe that, you believe that none of the conflicts going on around the world right now, whether that be Ukraine against Russia or the Israel-Hamas war, none of that would be possible without the explicit involvement of the United States. I wonder if you could expound a little bit on that.
Sure. Well, I think that if you look again with the Ukrainian conflict, the conflict in Gaza, and the tensions in this part of the world, which is not just with the Philippines, but also with Taiwan as well, that without the explicit support of the U.S., I think that tensions would certainly not be anywhere near as high in the South China Sea. The Ukraine conflict certainly would not have gone on anywhere as long as it has, or been anywhere near as destructive. And the death toll in Gaza, I mean, we're almost at 40,000 people killed, mostly women and children, certainly would not be anywhere near as high either. So I think that what I'm stating here is really a fact, not an opinion.
And you're worried that the Philippines...
And of course, some people would not like this.
Right.
You know, that there's two sides to every conflict, and the side that is being supported by the U.S. obviously benefits, at least in the short term.
Right. And you're worried that the Philippines may become the Pacific equivalent of Ukraine. Is that correct?
Well, I think that this is the wish of at least a few American policy makers, that, again, that China must be contained, it must be weakened, and the American strategy, again, you know, we need to understand that the U.S. is a continental country with enormous natural resources, a wealth of natural resources, but relatively few people, even though 330 million people is a lot of people. That it's always better to have someone else fight for you, right? There's a Chinese saying, borrowing a knife to kill somebody. And, you know, this has certainly been the strategy in Ukraine. And of course, very influential members of the American political establishment have publicly said that it's much better to have Ukrainians kill Russians than Americans kill Russians, because then the Americans would also suffer casualties. So I think it's not hard to see the parallel here with the Philippines.
Well, Andy, at this point in time, what should we do? I think we spoke to one analyst who said that we should wait, in terms of at least the diplomacy route, that we should wait for China to make the first move, because we kind of have tried this and that already and nothing seems to be working. And as you said, patience must be shown and must be exhibited, and we must sit tight. Having said that, should we wait for China to kind of like extend an olive branch, or if not an olive branch, at least make the first move?
I think that's very hard to say. And again, I think if we look at politics in general, you know, I'm a little bit more familiar with American politics than Filipino politics. But to get anything done often takes a long time, and those involved in the American political process often talk about the importance of the stars being aligned. So it not only requires dedicated people of goodwill working together to solve a problem, but sometimes it takes a change in external circumstances for a lasting agreement to be reached. So I'm personally not so sure that it requires one side to make an overture. But I do think that certainly, what is the alternative? So the alternative is greater escalation, more accidents like we just heard about. And of course, this can spiral and lead to an outright military conflict involving several countries. It could even escalate into a much wider conflict. And I think this is what worries and alarms many people around the world. And I think we all would agree that this is something best avoided.
I mean, you're right. It is something that worries people around the world, and there is precedent for China's militarization. It used military force to occupy the Paracel Islands in 1974, also forcibly seized control of the Johnson South Reef in the Spratlys from Vietnam in 1988. There is a lot of precedent there to draw from. What is the best case scenario here for the Philippines, given that we have been running a year and a half of stories about run-ins out in the disputed water, particularly Second Thomas Shoal?
Yeah, I think that's very difficult for people that are not directly involved in these discussions to say. But I think certainly, as you mentioned earlier, this is a very emotional issue. There are real interests at stake here. This part of the world has enormous natural resources. It's a vital lane of shipping for global shipping. So certainly, these are important issues. They're high-stake issues, and a peaceful resolution that can, as much as possible, accommodate everyone's interest is the best outcome. Now, how close we can get to that, I think, of course, will depend a lot on the people actually involved negotiating this topic, and on external events as well.
Right.
Maybe the stars will align, maybe they won't. I think we really don't know. But I think, again, it's in everyone's interest to avoid escalation. And I think from the Philippines' perspective, to avoid leaning on this crumbling wall, because in the long term, this might not serve Filipino interests very well.
Give us the general sentiment of President Bongbong Marcos's speech at the Shangri-La Dialogue in Singapore a few weeks ago, what people are saying there on the ground in Beijing about it.
Well, again, I think that the view is, and I think there's certainly some facts to back this up, that this is certainly encouraged, that it's the flames are being fanned by the United States. And of course, this is not to say that the Philippines does not have agency here. It certainly does. I think the people's sentiments are certainly important. Again, this is also dangerous as well, that, if there's rising anger or feeling, this can be very negative. So I think the view from Beijing is that certainly, that a more amicable approach would probably be more constructive. But, the door is always open. And I think this is one of the hallmarks of Chinese diplomacy, is this pragmatism that is completely non-ideological, that as long as parties approach this on the basis of mutual respect and respect for sovereignty, that discussions and win-win outcomes are the best way to address these kinds of problems, even if they can take quite a long time.